From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Congress scrambles once again to fund the federal government as a pre-Christmas shutdown deadline nears. Plus, the jockeying begins for the GOP's best strategy next year on using the budget reconciliation process to pass President Trump's agenda. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua. The latest expiration date on funding for the federal government is December 20th, which I must say feels a little bit grinchy. Nobody wants a Christmas government shutdown. Speaker Mike Johnson has said previously that he has no interest in passing a pre-Christmas omnibus spending bill. So, Kim, how do you see this playing out? What does it look like Congress is setting itself up to do here?
Yeah, so here we are again. And why are we here? We are here because government is supposed to, in both the House and the Senate, pass 12 annual appropriations bills, funding different departments, which then are supposed to be signed by the president. They never get that done. Once again, they haven't got it done. The way that they have dealt with this in the past is these big omnibus bills where they just throw it all into one great big Christmas spending bonanza. But Republicans have said that they are against doing that anymore. By the way, the House did pass probably, I think, through the full House, about 6 of their bills. The Senate had all of theirs ready to go, but Chuck Schumer would not make any time on the Senate floor to get them done because he wanted to give that time to confirming Biden judges. So what the decision has been is that rather than try to sort this all out before the end of the year, they're going to pass another continuing resolution, which will just maintain current funding levels. It'll probably take them into March of next year, which means that a new Congress under a new president would sort out the funding for the rest of the year. Remember, our fiscal year runs from September to September. So we're already 3 months into that year. I think this is going to pass mostly because everyone wants to go home and leave for the holidays. And nobody really wants to have a protracted spending fight right now. The issue, I think, for Mike Johnson will be that there's a lot of conservative House Republicans that in protest of the fact that we're not engaged in a regular order for the budget, they always vote against a continuing resolution. So likely Johnson will have to get some Democratic votes for this. I don't see that as being a difficulty, though.
As a reminder, the breakdown in the House of Representatives right now, according to the House website, is 220 Republicans to 211 Democrats. Monet, I tend to agree with Kim here that Johnson will be able to get this over the line without paying too much of a price. One of the dynamics here, obviously, is people want to get home for the holiday. They don't want to be stuck in Washington fighting about how to end some sort of government shutdown over the Christmas vacation. And part of it, too, might be just an interest in kicking the broader debate into the new Congress. Remember, we just had an election in the House, at least, that Mike Johnson's margin has gotten a slight bit narrower, though remarkable how similar the outcome next year in the House will be to the outcome right now. In the Senate, Republicans picked up a few seats, and so the party control will change there. But it seems like part of the interest here might be just having this spending fight another day with another Congress.
Right. I think that Democrats want to pick their spots in terms of obstructing the Republican legislative agenda. And you saw this during the Congress, which is about to come to an end during the course of Mike Johnson's speakership. Democrats were willing to lend votes to pass legislation despite being in the minority on things like a supplemental funding bill for a lot of the overseas defense initiatives that President Biden was supporting in order to keep government funded previously. And they know that they're not going to be able to extract huge concessions in return for their votes on issues like this, where there's broad consensus that it needs to pass, particularly on funding the government. They don't think that a government shutdown would play to their advantage right after the election, going into a new Congress and another president coming in. But as you indicated, they know that the Republican majority is about to shrink even further and become minuscule after January, and Republicans are going to be really struggling to keep their caucus on board to get some of their big legislative priorities passed, which we'll get into later. But those are things that Democrats really oppose on the policy substance, things like border reform, things like energy reform, and of course the big tax bill, they're going to have significant disagreements with those policies. And so I think they're focused right now on organizing and seeing if there'll be any way to peel off votes from those things, and think that that will play much more to their advantage in terms of campaigning to try to take back the House in the next midterm elections.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. On the Republican side of the aisle, the debate is already heating up about the GOP's best strategy to advance its priorities in the next Congress. And Kim, the key thing to understand here is that the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 set up what is called a budget reconciliation process that allows certain bills on tax and spending and so forth to go through the Senate without being subject to a filibuster. And next year, because there was no a budget resolution this year, next year, Republicans will have the opportunity to do this twice, once for fiscal 2025 and once for fiscal 2026. So that is setting up a debate inside the GOP conference about what the best approach here is, whether it's to try to do the tax bill first, whether it's to try to do other priorities first, to do them in one reconciliation bill, two reconciliation bills. What is your read of those arguments on the GOP side about how to proceed when the new Congress gets seated in 2025?
Here's the argument that's going on right now. Incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who will take control in January, he has advanced a plan in which what they would do is they would very quickly use the first reconciliation bill to jump on a number of Donald Trump's top priorities, things that he outlined on the campaign trail, in particular, the border, energy, and defense. So, for instance, in the border, the expectation is that he's going to come into office, sign a bunch of executive orders, and make a lot of changes to try to halt these huge migrant flows. The budget bill would be used to buttress him by, maybe putting money for more ICE officers, more beds, more immigration judges that are overseeing these asylum claims, to also engage in this effort to do something, maybe some deportation of some people who are already here. These budget bills, they have to be about money. They have to be about spending or saving. They can't really get into policy, but with Donald Trump saying he wants to do a lot on energy, you could do this with federal leasing because that has to deal with revenue for the federal government. And then defense, we are woefully behind in a number of things, and they want to use this bill to put some money forward. So they'd use the first bill for those pressing things, have it done by the end of January or early February, and put a notch on the board, say, look, we are making progress already on the things that Donald Trump said he'd change. And then reserve that second reconciliation bill for a much bigger, harder question, which is tax reform. And the 2017 tax reform, most of its provisions, they are going to expire, but not until the end of next year. And the argument that Thune is advancing, which I think is very sound, is that if you try to do that tax stuff right away, first of all, you're not going to get it done. It's very complex. There are many disagreements among Republicans over lots of different issues. So you're just going to get bogged down right away doing the tax thing. This has gotten pushback from House members like Ways and Means Chair Jason Smith, who I think is fearful that using that first bill for completely other issues will mean that taxes end up falling by the wayside. I think that's a little bit overwrought because the Republicans understand they are staring down the barrel of a gun, as it were. If you get to the end of next year and do nothing, most Americans are going to experience a tax hike, which is not something they want to have happen. So I think it will get done. The Thune strategy allows more time to work through those issues.
To give the due to Jason Smith's argument, here he is quoted in an NBC News story. He says, "My goal is to make sure we're successful on making sure Trump's tax cuts are made permanent and extended. That's my number one focus, and I believe the best strategy to get that is to do one large bill," unquote. And I understand the logic of that, Monet, that if you have a first priority, that it is the priority you should do first. But I tend to agree with Kim here because there are many provisions of potential tax reform bill that split Republicans. And one obvious one is the deduction for state and local taxes that was capped at $10,000 per year in the 2017 tax reform. Many Republicans support that idea, think it should be gotten rid of entirely. And the argument there is that it's a subsidy for blue jurisdictions primarily. New York, California, San Francisco, Manhattan. The people who are paying more and deducting more in state and local taxes are generally people who are well off and living in areas like that. And it allows the tax collectors in those state capitals and in those cities to raise their taxes by $1 without inflicting $1's worth of pain, because some of that ends up being subsidized by federal taxpayers. And so that's a problem. President Trump, though, on the 2024 campaign trail, suggested at some point that he might want to raise this. Here's a headline in the last day or so from Bloomberg. Trump advisors consider raising SALT write-off limit to $20,000. So that's a place where there's going to be a lot of debate, even among Republicans, about what this ultimate tax reform bill should look like. And remember, Speaker Johnson's majority, thin as it is now, is going to be even thinner next year.
Yes, I think that is one of the very, very big contentious fights that we're looking at, and is one of the reasons why Republicans are going to want to take it slow and build consensus before they move on the tax bill. I am optimistic that SALT is something where fiscally responsible Republicans will be able to hold the line and make sure that that cap isn't increased, or isn't increased by a very large amount if they do have to tweak it a little bit. One of the things that gives me reason for hope is, unfortunately, the House Republicans lost quite a lot of their members who were the most invested in increasing that cap on SALT deductions. Some of those members from New York State, some members from California. I believe both states lost 3 each, which means that their voting base is not going to consist so much of people whose prospect for re-election depends on SALT. But I do think that there are a few other provisions that are going to be contentious too. One is a lot of the credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, which they're going to have to look to repeal in order to get funding to reduce the top income tax rate and do some of the other pro-growth reforms that they want to do. I think Republicans in general believe that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be an important place to be able to find revenue to fund the tax reforms that they want to pass. But in the details, there are going to be a lot of disagreements. There are a lot of people who are representing districts that have seen a windfall from some of these provisions and are going to want concessions, or are going to need to have their hands held by leadership in order to be able to take a difficult vote and return some of that revenue. And so there's no way for Jason Smith and others to be able to sprint ahead with a tax bill without making sure that everyone's on board with so many of these different details. And that is something that lends itself to proceeding on border, defense, and energy first, and making sure that they take their time to get it right and build consensus before they take the more difficult vote.